Right, hey guys, this is my presentation for Mac versus PC, the age-old debate, which I know that people here definitely fall on both sides of the argument quite strongly, but I'm going to hope to try and settle it a bit, at least for terms of editing purposes. Right, this is an overview of what's going on in this presentation. It's a bit long. I'll try not to overrun. But yeah, we're going to go through, first off, we're going to go over the requirements. So what the editing software I'm specifically looking at, which we'll be using on the requirements, be DaVinci Resolve 15 and Premiere Pro CC. Mostly because I personally use DaVinci Resolve because it's free and very good. Well, there's a free version of it at least. And Premiere Pro CC is what most people here use, I believe. Right, the requirements for DaVinci Resolve are that you need at least 2 GB of VRAM, GPU's memory, or for a comfortable HD experience, or 4 GB of VRAM for a comfortable 4K work. 16 GB of RAM at least for your system, and 32 GB of RAM is recommended. And according to most according to Richard Lackey, and it specifies that to make sure your laptop has an SSD or fast external media storage if it's on a laptop. It doesn't make so much difference if you're on a physical PC or iMac, but it definitely helps to have fast internal storage. And obviously 1080p screen I think is generally taken for granted if you're going to be editing at least a 1080p screen. Premiere Pro CC requirements, according to Adobe themselves on their website for the 13.0 version, is that you have a minimum of 4 GB of RAM inside the graphics card, minimum of 16 GB of RAM overall, which is memory, recommended 32 GB of RAM if you want to go not extra smoothly, and recommended to have an SSD for storing the Premiere file itself and for storing the media files you plan to be using in the editing. So you could also have additional storage for like other files you're not using at the main time. Top of that, and 1080p screen. So overall, I'm setting the minimum requirements at 4 GB of VRAM, 16 GB of RAM, and 1080p screen. Okay, first off, I'm going to look at a comparison between the iMac 2017. I was trying to look at a stronger version of it. So if you're going to do like a particularly solid for video editing, iMac, which is a bit more overkill, so give 8 GB of VRAM and 5K Retina P3 screen, which is extremely good for very, very detailed edits. 3.8 GHz i5 processor. This comes with a Magic Mouse and Magic Keyboard 2. Has 2 USB-C ports and 4 standard USB 3 ports, which is good in comparison to a lot of the more recent Apple products, is they only have USB-C ports, so it means you have less need for adapters. A 2 TB Fusion Hybrid drive, an SDXC card slot, so you don't have to get more adapters for SD cards. Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, so you don't have to connect up an Ethernet cable. With this, I got 8 GB RAM version. If you get the 8 GB RAM version, you can adjust the RAM yourself, so it's much cheaper. And adding up to get extra RAM and to add it up to make a 32 GB Mac, it will cost you £155.97 for RAM, meeting the minimum requirements. Okay, and I tried to make as close of a copy as possible using the website PC Part Picker, which is a really good site for getting very specific parts for PC at the cheapest prices possible. So I tried to meet the minimum requirements. It was simple, so I could try and make it as nice looking as possible. I went for a black minimalistic theme because it's not the easiest to go for white, and yeah, and a lot of stuff ends up looking like a gaming, which is like neon, and it's not the nicest looking, to be honest with you. For a Gigabyte mechanical keyboard and optical mouse, and for comfort, because I found like a mechanical keyboard, especially if you're doing long edits, a mechanical keyboard is going to be much more comfortable, and a comfortable wide mouse. A 32 GB Corsair Vengeance RAM, 3.8 gigahertz i5, same, but almost the same as what was in the Mac, and a hybrid drive. Okay, I had to look specifically into the graphics card because to make sure it was, because the Radeon Pro 580, which is inside the Mac, is not available commercially to buy. At least I could not find it online. So I had to get as close as possible as I could in specs for the Radeon R9 390, as you can see circled there, which has almost exactly the same specifications, but according to Tech Power Up, it is 98% performance in comparison to the Mac's 580, 100% performance. They both have 8GB of VRAM, and but the one I put in the PC effectively has a higher boost clock, but that's only by 0.05%. Never mind. Okay. The problem is trying to replicate an iMac. You cannot accurately recreate the screen simply because 5K monitors are not available on the market particularly. You can buy, the only one available commercially that I could find there's an LG Ultrafine 5K display, P3, 27-inch, exactly the same as the iMac monitor in that sense, but it only works via USB-C, and to my belief you cannot use, I don't know how easy it would be to use USB-C with a PC, a standard PC, connecting it up. It seems definitely to be designed very much to only be used as a second monitor with Apple produce. And that costs you hefty £1,179 for that monitor. And it's so the fact is you can't accurately get that yourself if you want to build a PC. So if you really want a strong screen, you'd have to go with an iMac. You got iMac. Instead I went for 4K 27-inch Asus, which is not as good, but it's still 4K, and effectively at $589.97, it's not too bad cost-wise. So overall, that comes to in comparison, even though effectively it's not a fair comparison, I don't believe, is that you could get that a very good editing PC for £1,762 at 28, whereas the Mac would have cost you, including an education discount, which I'm sure we could all get, £2,180 37, which is a fair difference. Now I'm going to go into comparisons between, in terms for laptops, if you want to use a laptop instead. And we're going to look at the most recent MacBook, which reaches the minimum requirements. One of the odd things I found out was that most MacBooks do not meet minimum requirements for Adobe Premiere, because most of them have Intel Iris's integrated graphics, which means they don't effectively have graphics cards because they run off the system's RAM. And it's not sufficient for, according to Adobe, it's not sufficient. So this one has a touch bar, 16 gigabytes of RAM, an AMD Radeon Pro 555X with 4 gigabyte of VRAM, 256 gigabyte solid state drive, 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, but no USB ports, so you're going to have to buy dongles. A 2K P3 screen, so a very nice quality screen, but it's 2K, so it's kind of in between. You're not going to be able to view 4K as 4K, but it's much stronger than a 1080p. And a 2.2 gigahertz i7 Intel processor. To compare to this is, we have here is the MacBook X Pro, which looks very close to a MacBook, I would at least argue, because one of the arguments is always that MacBooks, and I always say myself, they look really nice, undeniably. But this is designed almost to replicate exactly a MacBook. It's not quite the same, though. It's got 16 gigabyte of RAM, 512 gigabyte SSD, 8 gigabyte of VRAM provided by NVIDIA, in opposed to AMD. Although NVIDIA effectively should work better with Premiere because Premiere is designed to work around NVIDIA graphics cards. A 3K touchscreen, so effectively it's a higher amount of pixels. Although it's not P3, there's no color specification. So the fact is, if you want to do really good color grading, you're not necessarily going to get that as in depth. But it's also a touchscreen. if that had any use. As video editors, I don't think so, but convenience, I guess. Also includes a Dolby Atmos sound system, which is extra good sound quality then. Has a HDMI port, which is very useful for connecting up to a projector or a second screen. But the problem is it's made by Huawei, I believe that's how we pronounce it, which is a very controversial company at the time, at current events. And I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but our government very much does not like Huawei because of their association strongly with the Chinese government, and they're very controversial at the moment, and may have restrictions to a system if you bought one. But overall price, though, in comparison, though, those is $1,699.99 for the Huawei MateBook Pro, and for the Apple MacBook Pro, it will cost you £2,114.40, which is quite the fair difference, considering that there's not that much of a difference other than the operating system and screen quality. So for the next section, I decided to look at the cheapest laptops I possibly could, whilst meeting the requirements and still being good laptops. So going for 4GB of VRAM and 16GB of RAM, I looked on the Currys website because it gave me a good specified system to look at, allowed to be in depth, whilst a lot of sites like John Lewis and Amazon, they don't actually give you a very good range, and a lot of stuff wasn't in stock. So looking at that, I found one option was HP Pavilion 15. HP have always been a solid. Hewlett-Packard, very good make, just renowned for being very solid. This one is a 256GB SSD, an NVIDIA GeForce MX150 with 4GB VRAM, so meets the requirements in terms of VRAM, 16GB of RAM, a 1.8 GHz Intel i7 processor, so it's not the most powerful of processors, but it's still an i7. 1080p IPS screen, so it's still pretty solid in screen-wise, but at the minimum, really. Bluetooth, an SD card reader, Bang & Olufsen sound, so it's got good sound from it, which will be useful for editing. 3 USB 3.1 ports and 1 USB-C port, so it's still got USB-C option, but it's got a nice amount of USB ports and HDMI, so you can still connect up to an extra screen. The Lenovo Legion, which I find is very close to what it offers. The difference is this one is 128GB SSD, so a smaller SSD, but it also has a 1TB hard drive. The differences with that is that you wouldn't have to buy yourself an external hard drive necessarily. Maybe in the future you would, but it means you can store a lot more on that, and you can definitely fit all your editing stuff on the SSD. That comes with an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1050 Ti with 4GB VRAM, which is a slightly better graphics card than the previous laptop. I know it's good graphics card because I have one myself on my PC. It's a solid graphics card. A 2.3 GHz Intel i5 processor. Although it's an i5, not an i7, effectively it's a better processor. And it's 1080p with IPS, again, great screen. Bluetooth. The difference is it does not have an SD card reader, so I've written that wrong, which is one of the flaws in comparison. Although an SD card adapter, you can get a Kingston one, which I myself for like £8 on Amazon or less. It also comes with Dolby Home Theater sound. Dolby are one of the very well rated for sound, obviously. A lot of film involvement with that. Although it is a home theater, it would still be of help to how the system's designed with its sound card. 3 USB 3.1 ports plus 1 USB-C port, exactly the same as with the HP. HDMI has a backlit, but it also has a backlit keyboard with a numpad, which will help for I don't know what the numpad's not going to be a massive use, but you know, just in case you're doing a lot of number working, which I don't think has much to do with editing. But the backlit keyboard means it'll be more convenient for editing later at night. My overall opinion, I've come to the conclusion of is that PC is definitely significantly better value for money, for sure, much cheaper for what you want to get, and you can definitely get minimum requirements for significantly less. And you get a very large amount of options. Mac, for Mac in difference, you can get high quality screens. You can't get that with PC, definitely not. Very nice aesthetic designs, and they're generally very reliable, and they can last you for years. and you can't go that badly wrong if you get a good Mac. Indifference. Right. Thank you for your patience, and oh Jesus, I overran by a long time. And yeah. Cheers.